Hi, I'm David Shipler.
And I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Two reporters. Start now.
Hi, Danny. How you doing?
Great, thanks. And here's our mission today. We're going to learn how some brave employees in the Trump administration have been risking their jobs. Some have faced death threats. Why? Because they have principles, and they've been exposing how Trump and his top officials keep breaking the law. Most people would probably call these employees whistleblowers, right? Although, as we're going to hear in a moment, some of them don't really see themselves that way.
And one thing that really surprises me when I looked into this and heard about it is that during the Trump administration, in 2025 particularly, there were some 1,500 whistleblowers who came to the organization our guest helps to run for help, and that's triple the number in a normal year, which what's surprising is that you'd think government employees would be more frightened of retaliation than ever, given that Trump has made a specialty of trying to destroy anyone who stands up to him.
Well, our guest today has spent years trying to help whistleblowers go public and protect them. Dana Gold helps run the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Project.
Thank you both so much.
GAP has represented some remarkable people over the past, almost 50 years? And you've been there for a lot of them. Tell us a little bit about them.
They are people from all sectors, all issues. And I really think what's so surprising about a whistleblower is that they're often people who have been, part of a system working, in either an industry or as a civil servant for years, just part of doing the good work that they're paid to do and they signed up to do, and find themselves in a situation that they had not anticipated of seeing a problem. Sometimes I always say there are people who didn't get the memo that they might suffer blowback for raising a concern, because they're often some of the most loyal workers within an institution who see a problem and have belief that by raising the concern they're doing the right thing and the response will be to fix the problem, and all of a sudden they find themselves the problem as opposed to the problem that they're blowing the whistle on or raising a concern about. And so sometimes they come to us having very surprisingly experienced disorienting reprisal because it's really not what they had expected.
It almost sounds, Daniel, like some of these people are naive. I don't mean in a bad way, but naive, thinking, hey, I'm just doing my job. I took an oath. I believe in, having the government do honorable work. And so I want to point to a problem. And they don't realize how the forces of evil, in some cases, are going to try to crush them.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes the case. I think that's less the case in recent years. I think there's far more awareness, on the part of whistleblowers or employees who speak up that they should think about how to do that in a way that's careful and protected. But yeah, absolutely. I think that often there's a lot of trust in their supervisors, right, or their institutions, and they don't see a problem with doing their job and raising a concern. I will say that we only get called in when it doesn't work. Right. There are times, I am sure, where people raise concerns internally and management says thank you and they fix the problem. There are those stories that aren't public, I think.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But whistleblowers have played an important role in American history. I mean, a lot of people still remember the name Daniel Ellsberg, and that was more than 50 years ago. And just to remind everybody, back in the early 70s, Ellsberg revealed the Pentagon Papers, which was the government's secret history of American involvement in Vietnam, which revealed, among other things, that the CIA knew that the U.S. would probably lose the war, but leaders kept lying about it. And revealing the Pentagon Papers helped pressure the government to end the war.
Then jump ahead more than 30 years, and several government employees blew the whistle after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center. And they revealed that the top secret NSA, the National Security Agency, was secretly spying on millions of Americans, which violated the Constitution's Fourth Amendment because they did not have warrants to do so.
And Dana, before we get to one of your current cases, we should stress that over the years, the federal government has passed laws that basically tell government workers, if you see something, say something. You can blow the whistle to call attention to problems and not get in trouble, in theory.
Yes, you have speech rights as a federal employee under the Whistleblower Protection Act to make disclosures that you reasonably believe are information that evidences violations of laws, rules, or regulations, gross mismanagement, gross waste of funds, abuse of authority, and a substantial and specific danger to health and safety. And you have rights to make those disclosures as a federal employee to Congress, to the OSC, the Office of Special Counsel, to IGs, to lawmakers, to the press even.
And this is in the law. This is actually in the law.
It's in the law. These are your rights as federal employees.
And that brings us to one of your most important ongoing cases, which has generated a huge amount of public attention. Could we talk about the lawyer named Erez Reuveni at the Justice Department and what happened to him when the Trump administration started rounding up immigrants and deporting them?
A legal showdown underway over President Trump's deportations of hundreds of Venezuelans to El Salvador over the weekend. President Trump invoked a 200-year-old act that gives the president wartime powers to deport undocumented immigrants with little to no due process.
A federal judge temporarily blocked the deportation, saying it is unclear if the Alien Enemies Act applies, but the flights took off anyway. John
So
Fenolio
Dana,
reports.
take us back, if you would, to March 2025. Erez Reuveni is widely respected at the Justice Department.
Erez Reuveni had just been promoted to acting director of the Office of Immigration Litigation for the Department of Justice. He's been a 15-year career employee across administrations, nonpartisan, doing the work of a Department of Justice lawyer representing the interests of the administration.
Reuveni had gone into court a number of times and vigorously defended
the Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies, exactly, as well as under the Biden administration. He, did the similar work.
That was his job.
That's what you do, exactly.
And it turns out that one of the men that the administration rounds up and sends to that prison in El Salvador is a man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who has a family and lives in Maryland.
So in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, Erez Reuveni was lead attorney, and the Trump administration very much wanted to deport Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That actually happened. They had deported him mistakenly, and that happens sometimes.
And he was, at this point, he was in El Salvador, right?
He was in El Salvador at this point.
In that horrible prison.
Exactly. And usually what happens in that case is that they work to get the person back. I mean, so it's like, here, we made a mistake. We're going to work to get the person back.
And Erez Reuveni happens to be the Trump administration's man in court who's working on Garcia's case. And he starts trying to fix the mistake and bring Garcia back to the U.S.
So that was the process that Erez was undergoing, as they usually do, but ran into interference where his superiors at Department of Justice wanted him to maintain to the court that Kilmar Abrego Garcia had MS-13 gang ties, and there was no evidence of that. And Erez is trying to, do the right thing and get him back. He's at a hearing in front of a judge in Maryland, in the Maryland District Court, and he acknowledges Garcia was deported by mistake, and that there was no evidence that he was a member of a gang, and he refused to lie to the court. He refused to lie and say that Garcia was a gang member. Later that night, he was asked to file and sign a brief, again issuing misrepresentations to the court about Kilmar Abrego Garcia's gang affiliations. Erez Reuveni refused to do that. He refused to sign the brief.
Yeah, here's the government lawyer who's refusing to actually push the case, so to speak, refusing to
lie. Yeah, he has ethical obligations, right, as a lawyer to engage in candor with the court. I mean, it would violate his ethical duties, right, to lie to the court and misrepresent facts.
And so Trump's people go after Reuveni. The attorney general announces they're putting him on leave because he failed to do his job properly. And by the way, this is less than a month after they've just promoted him.
In other news, a federal judge says a man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador must be returned to the U.S. by tonight. The DOJ did place one of their attorneys on paid leave after he struggled to defend the government's case Friday.
And Stephen Miller, who's the main architect of Trump's immigration policies, denounces Reuveni as, quote, a saboteur, a Democrat, unquote.
And in the midst of all this, Erez Reuveni comes to you and the Government Accountability Project and he asks you to advise him, what should I do?
He had other information to share about the 3 weeks leading up to his administrative leave.
Including, Reuveni tells you about an amazing meeting he's had with one of the top officials who was running the Justice Department at the time.
Yeah.
Emil Bovey.
Around the fact that the weekend of Donald Trump signing the Alien Enemies Act, he and his team members had been told by Bovey, they were told that it was a priority for the administration to deport these planes over the weekend. And if they experience interference from judges, they might have to say fuck you to those courts.
And you were being soft-spoken, which we don't have to be. This guy,
Bovey,
told his lawyers they might have to tell the courts, fuck you.
yes.
And Dana, you and your colleagues tell that story to Congress, and soon the whole world is hearing it.
Bombshell whistleblower complaint rocking the Trump DOJ and administration. It alleges a top Trump official said the DOJ could plot to tell the courts F you and ignore judicial orders that the president didn't like, which is what happens in autocratic regimes. This is a new, damning account of an assault on the rule of law. It comes from a very soft...
And this is Emil Bovey who said this, a high-level Justice Department official, just to make clear to everyone, who then after that was nominated by Trump to be a judge on a federal appeals court and was confirmed by the Senate.
That's right.
And that's where he now sits. This is really a huge scandal. I mean, actually.
This is a huge scandal.
And it's curious, the FU story isn't even the reason that Reuveni went to you in the first place, right? I mean, you only learned those details after you asked him to tell you what led up to his being fired.
Nobody had known beforehand the story of Emil Bovey directing basically the attorneys to potentially disobey court orders, right? Or to, say fuck you to the courts. None of that had been public. And over the next 3 weeks, Erez Reuveni saw that in action. He saw the violations of court orders in the first case with the planes that were literally being flown to El Salvador. The judge was saying, bring those planes back. And those planes landed in El Salvador. And this was in clear violation, and the timeline is very clear. And they were misrepresenting to the court their knowledge of the status of those planes. It happened in another case, and then, of course, it happened in Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So there are 3 instances of grotesque violations of the rule of law, right? Of lying to courts, and we helped Erez make disclosures about like these larger issues about Emil Bovey giving instructions that they might have to disobey court orders in June of 2024.
Reuveni's case raises an important and complicated issue, which is that it's tricky enough to become a whistleblower and make sure you're protected under the whistleblower laws, but it's even trickier if you're a lawyer who wants to blow the whistle, because lawyers have to walk a tightrope.
And it is tricky because lawyers work for agencies and the agencies are their clients. So that relationship gets a bit difficult to work through. The fine print in those laws spell out various exceptions, right?
Yeah.
Depending on which agency you work in, which part of the country you're in, et cetera. We don't need to get into the weeds, but the bottom line is being a whistleblower can get very, very complicated.
Yes, it's extremely complicated because it does depend on where you're licensed and what you're blowing the whistle on.
Well, this is really interesting and significant because every government lawyer ought to be aware of this.
And you and your colleagues have to do almost surgical work in advising these people who come to you, these potential whistleblowers, and trying to help them go public.
Yes.
I mean, this isn't just a matter of saying, don't worry, we'll protect you. I mean, it's very strategic what you do.
It's very strategic. And that was what was very hard to parse, to your point about how are we able to make those very fulsome disclosures with verified evidence, which we also shared with Congress, in light of his constraints, right, under the ethical rules. And we had a team of 3 ethics attorneys to analyze every sentence of the disclosure that we were making to Congress and the OIG and the Office of Special Counsel on behalf of Erez Reuveni, analyzing the limitations within his licensing requirements and his rights to make disclosures. And it was very complicated. And I say this, why it was so complicated is because we knew that one of the most predictable retaliatory moves that would come against Erez Reuveni by the Department of Justice or any enemies against him would be to go after his bar license.
When you first were sitting down with him, how did he describe to you what he, feeling torn, which I'm imagining he did, about, what to do next?
Yeah, it's really lonely being a whistleblower sometimes.
Lonely. Mm.
And it can be very scary. As a lawyer, it's often like literally almost the therapeutic part of being an attorney, of supporting someone who has just had their world rocked for doing the right thing. I think he was shell-shocked a little bit. I think he was angry, understandably. It was also just such a very public attack on him. He was being very, publicly attacked in the press. He has a family with a young child and a wife. And in this era, whistleblowers right now, they're not concerned about what I call kind of the quaint forms of retaliation that the laws exist to protect you against, which is like firing or demotions or, kind of adverse personnel actions within the workplace. People are worried about being doxxed. They're worried about being killed. They're worrying about, physical threats. They're worried about their bar licenses being attacked. They're worried about criminal prosecutions. So it's a totally different ballgame of risk that employees are facing right now for whistleblowing.
So would you bring us up to date on Erez Reuveni? He's become a public face of officials in the Trump administration who still have principles and refuse to subvert the law. Where's his case now, getting fired and all that?
Well, so we're challenging that. So we have a Whistleblower Protection Act lawsuit, basically, that is front of the Merit Systems Protection Board, seeking relief for his retaliation. But he's been okay. He's been okay, actually. I mean, I would say that Erez has been a success story. He catalyzed tremendous change. His disclosures were explosive. They have had the effect of putting the entire Department of Justice on their heels, because he has basically, not he alone, but he has been a piece of eroding the presumption of regularity that is afforded to the Department of Justice, which is basically a norm based on the fact that the Department of Justice is there to serve justice.
You probably need to explain what the presumption of regularity is.
Yes, the presumption is that Department of Justice's lawyers are telling the truth. Their information, if they're bringing an action, is legitimate, and they're not trying to win for the sake of winning. They're winning for justice. So if they lose, that's fine. If they win, that's fine. But basically, they are serving the interests of the people, right? Of justice. And so now...
So, excuse me, this is the court's presumption, correct? The judge presumes, just basically defers to the honesty and integrity of the Department of Justice, right?
Yes, there is this deference that has historically been given that is now, it's actually almost flipped. It's not that it's gone, it's flipped. It's like you see judges in their decisions, they don't believe the veracity of the lawyers from the Department of Justice that are in front of them.
Judges across the country have written these incredible decisions denouncing Department of Justice lawyers.
Yes, yes.
This is really a huge erosion in the whole system, isn't it, really?
It's devastating. I mean, it's important, right? Because we do see a Department of Justice that is willing to defy court orders and lie to courts.
And Dana, you and your organization, Government Accountability Project, are representing dozens of people in the government who are challenging Trump's lawlessness. Let's just name a few. Whistleblowers at the Homeland Security Department, whistleblowers in EPA, whistleblowers inside FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration. You've had whistleblowers in the Secret Service.
Which you won't talk about, I understand, yet. And in the Social Security Administration. Your whistleblowers revealed last fall that Elon Musk's team had copied data from 500 million Social Security accounts and transferred confidential information about home addresses, places of birth, names of family members, health information, banking accounts, citizenship status, etc., to outside servers.
And I have no idea why this has not been like an ongoing huge public scandal.
We still don't know the details of what they're doing with it. There are various investigations going on.
But in other news, your whistleblowers at the Voice of America just won another victory in court, right? Trump and his allies have been trying to eliminate the Voice of America, or at least turn it into a Trump propaganda mouthpiece.
A U.S. federal judge has ordered the reinstatement of more than 1,000 employees laid off from Voice of America. The judge ordered the employees to return by March 23rd after finding the Trump administration's funding cuts to the network illegal. The agency in charge of VOA has also been ordered to submit a plan to restart its overseas broadcasts. The ruling follows massive layoffs in March 2025 amid sweeping funding and staff cuts.
We're not done
across
with
the
VOA,
US
but it's one of the few successes of an agency being completely restored, right? When you've seen like USAID be gutted, we represent department components of Department of Homeland Security that have been gutted. Those lawsuits are still continuing, but the VOA story is a huge success.
Yeah, but just to be the gadfly for a moment, Dana, you know better than I do because you're a lawyer, that at the district court level, which has done pretty well in terms of restraining Trump, that's one thing. But then if they appeal to the circuit court, the Court of Appeals, they might not get a positive decision. And then at the Supreme Court, of course, Trump has been upheld in many of the things he's wanted to do through the shadow docket, those emergency orders that the Supreme Court has issued. So the story probably isn't over yet, is it?
That's right. That's right.
Just to remind everyone, we are speaking with Dana Gold of the Government Accountability Project, which represents whistleblowers.
And Dana, before we move on, can we go back for a moment to Erez Reuveni? You were telling us earlier, and it was moving, about how he came to you, sort of in shock. He has a young family. He was afraid about his future. He was feeling torn about what he should do. So, Dana, what did you tell him exactly to help him decide, besides just talking about laws?
Well, I think I had the same conversation with him that I have with many whistleblowers these days, which is pretty existential, actually. I of course approach them as a lawyer, listening to what the facts are, right? Assuring them that the conversation is privileged, that the information stays with us unless the person seeking legal advice, chooses to waive the privilege, but basically their confidences are kept. And I listen and I collect facts and I ask questions. So that's really like kind of how it first works. But then we talk about goals, right? What are your goals? And what are you afraid of? What are your risks? And that's where the interesting conversations happen, I think, because, I feel like I give these kind of radical informed consent conversations to Erez or to other people who are in these situations of seeing wrongdoing and feeling like they cannot be complicit with what they are seeing and they need to speak out, and they are scared, right? They are scared because they see the nature of the retaliation that is possible, that again is just of a different scale than we've ever seen before. And, I explain, Government Accountability Project kind of deals with the two reasons why employees typically stay silent in the face of wrongdoing: fear of retaliation and fear that speaking up won't make a difference. And so the radical kind of informed consent speech really is that, yes, the fear of retaliation could not be more legitimate and it's more extreme than it's ever been. That is real. And the likelihood that we can make a difference with the information. Back in the old days, I used to have a great degree of confidence that by leveraging verified information, from a whistleblower, that we could make change, like pretty predictably, which was a really an awesome thing about this job, is to see the power of information when leveraged from someone willing to share it. I could see it make the mechanisms of accountability work. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, I don't know. I have no idea if I can make a difference. I don't even know if I can make a dent in the news.
There's a much higher threshold that you have to reach to generate outrage. And journalists understand this too. I mean, some years ago, pre-Trump, a a writer whose name I unfortunately can't remember, coined the term frozen scandals. That is, a scandal that was exposed by journalism and then it froze. Nothing happened. Nothing didn't go anywhere. The people who actually could make change never picked up on it to actually take those steps.
Right, right.
So, Dana, where did you go with that conversation?
So we have this kind of like this reality, accepting reality conversation. And then I say, and I know that staying silent does nothing. And as long as you know that we cannot promise that you will not suffer retaliation, and as long as you know that I cannot guarantee that we can make a difference, we will help you. And we have decades of experience in doing that. And we can do our best together. I would say about 3 years ago, this was during the Biden administration, actually, I think, I did this deep dive around hope and despair because I was seeing the mechanisms of accountability just not working, right? They're just like Congress, it wasn't necessarily as captured as it is now, but right, everything was weak. And I was like, is it ethical for me to represent a whistleblower, right, when the mechanisms of accountability are weak and even the avenues for justice are difficult for a whistleblower and the risk of retaliation is high? Like, can I even do this work ethically? And I did all of this reading about hope and despair. It was like really depressing.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
And I landed, luckily, the last book I read was Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark. And that luckily was like kind of like the last book I read. And
Hope in the Dark?
Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit, who is still writing really important essays for our time around the power of collective action and how hope is not just believing against belief that the right thing will happen. It's about that you just don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen. And we've seen time and time again in history that surprising movements of right action make a difference and it can catalyze change and reform. And you see that in authoritarian regimes. You see that where there are, natural disasters, people coming together to solve problems together. And I just landed in a place that I know that we do this very unique thing, that I have seen the power of a person acting from ethical conscience to use the power of speech and verified information to make a difference, and how even just one person can. And that's the right thing to do. And I'm going to help people do that, but again, with this radical informed consent. And so luckily I had already done that work before this administration came.
Well, that's really fascinating. Yeah.
So you were having kind of a philosophical, emotional crisis, maybe.
Yes, and I think that it and I think what I've done with clients is like talk about what does success mean. Sometimes for people it's about, I just need to make a record. I am making a record about this wrongdoing that I have seen. So when accountability mechanisms perhaps are more operational, that will exist for reckoning or reform down the road.
Yeah, I think it was Michelle Obama who said recently, courage is contagious.
Courage is absolutely contagious. And you see that often with our methodology of representing whistleblowers and helping them make a difference, that one person comes forward and then more people come forward.
Now, the Government Accountability Project has a battery of attorneys, right?
Yes.
Your own staff?
Yes.
But you can't take every case.
That is very true.
You have to be a little bit selective. And what are the criteria then?
Yeah, so we definitely cherry pick. I mean, we are doing impact work. We are different than a law firm. Like, we are not just a regular law firm that's representing any whistleblower, right? Our mission is to promote government and corporate accountability. And we do that by the methodology of working with whistleblowers and leveraging their information to make a difference. And so the criteria really are, we look at the significant public interest impact of a whistleblower's disclosures. We look at the credibility of their information, whether or not they have the goods evidentially to justify their belief that they've seen wrongdoing or illegality.
So it sounds like you want to make sure this is not just somebody who's disgruntled, the favorite word of the Trump people. You want to make sure this is a case that can have broad impact.
Yes.
Across government.
Yes. We have to reject a lot of folks who come to us, in part, not because they're not legitimate whistleblowers, but because the scope and scale of their disclosure is not significant enough for us to invest in or for us to be able to make change around, right? Like someone stealing Post-it notes from the supply cabinet. Not good, but nobody cares about that, right? But we do care about like $1 billion being stolen from the, the public.
We're supposed to, but unfortunately, under the Trump administration, they are.
We're supposed to.
In fact, we did an episode recently with the former head of the U.S. Office of Government Ethics, and we weren't talking about Trump and his associates stealing money, but as the ethics specialist said, the level of corruption among Trump and his family and friends and their conflicts of interest is mind-boggling.
We are seeing corruption at an unprecedented scale, right, with this administration. And yet abuse of power, illegality, wrongdoing have happened across administrations for decades. And that's why whistleblowers have enjoyed basically at least the theory of legal protections because we want them to be able to speak out. And I think it goes to the point of whistleblowers being historically, they're nonpartisan, they're not activists, right? They're workers. They're like people who do their jobs. They're usually highly ethical. They're usually nonpartisan, and they see a problem and they can't stay silent. They have to look at themselves in the mirror and they, feel compelled to speak up. These aren't radicals. They're people that are just doing their job, that are part of an institutional system.
Dana, we'd love to touch on a few other cases that you've worked on recently where people are just trying to do their job. For instance, you've been very personally invested in helping whistleblowers expose outrages in the immigration system. And some of the cases echo the case of Erez Reuveni.
I mean, all the immigration cases really mean a lot to me, especially because immigration has been like the entry point for real affronts to democracy and the rule of law by this administration. So our democracy work and the immigration work really line up. But that's something that's crossed administrations. So for instance, we represented some whistleblowers who had information about the effort by the HHS,
Department of Health and Human Services,
to deport children to Guatemala. I don't know if you remember that. So this was in September. They were very nervous and they wanted to stay anonymous, which we were able to help them do with the caveat that is no guarantee. And if anyone promises you complete anonymity forever and ever, you should run away very quickly because that is something that nobody can guarantee. But the acting secretary of the Health and Human Services Department, which handles unaccompanied children, they were trying to deport a whole flight of children to Guatemala, saying that the parents wanted them back and that they fit the categories for removal back to Guatemala. These whistleblowers came to us and said, HHS absolutely knows that many of those children on that manifest do not meet those criteria. As a matter of fact, they're flagged in the system as being victims of human trafficking and abuse. And so not only was it a Department of Justice issue, right, because it was another misrepresentation to the court, it was also an immigration issue because it was about these kids going back at risk of human trafficking and abuse.
Top Trump officials, again, were lying to the courts.
Exactly. So we were able to help these whistleblowers make disclosures to Congress that the court recognized and referenced in his written opinion, granting the injunction preventing that plane from being flown, referencing the whistleblowers' disclosures. It wasn't the only thing, but it mattered. It made a difference.
And were the whistleblowers retaliated against?
They were not.
Or did they remain anonymous?
They remained anonymous so far. We've represented nurses at different facilities, one who raised concerns about the fact that women at the Irwin County Detention Center were undergoing high rates of non-consensual invasive gynecological procedures without informed consent. That facility ended up being shut down because of her disclosures, and many other victims of that abuse coming forward with their own stories. And we represented whistleblowers during the Biden administration when unaccompanied children were being sent to Fort Bliss en masse. I don't know if you remember that, but that was like in 2020, 21, and unaccompanied children were being sent to Fort Bliss in huge numbers. And we had employees blow the whistle on the fact that the contractor who was running childcare was a contractor called ServPro that had no experience helping children. They do like fire and water damage repair. And the kids were in terribly negligent and dangerous conditions. We had 7 whistleblowers speak out under the Biden administration about the harms to those kids in those detention facilities.
And what happened in that case?
In that case, there was a big IG investigation.
Inspector General.
Those whistleblowers were all validated. The efforts to expedite kids getting released from those facilities were radically increased to get them out of those facilities. The populations, radically dropped.
And what happened to the whistleblowers in the end?
Most of them we helped make disclosures, and they didn't suffer reprisal.
Still, even though, some whistleblowers end up okay on their feet, there have been people whose whole lives have been turned upside down. Let me refer to a study that came out recently by somebody at the Rand Corporation and at Oxford University. They surveyed 30 whistleblowers kind of at random who had been in the press over the past 30 or 40 years. And they found that a large percentage of them, more than half of them, faced some sort of retaliation. Many were fired. A minority, but a significant minority, faced death threats, harassment. And you're nodding your head as I...
Yeah.
Yeah, like, for example, Thomas Tam, who was a Justice Department lawyer, who was the first source for the New York Times blockbuster story on the NSA monitoring Americans without warrants. And he was fired. He was threatened with criminal prosecution. He couldn't really get a regular lawyering job. In fact, he was brought before the D.C. bar with a complaint aiming at getting him disbarred because he had supposedly violated his relationship with his client, who was the Justice Department.
And Dave, this was under the second Bush administration?
The second Bush administration, right shortly after 9/11, yeah. In the end, he accepted a censure. He didn't get disbarred, but his career was really ruined. Thomas Drake is another case, an NSA worker, very highly skilled computer expert, who went to the Baltimore Sun with information on a computer program designed to do mass surveillance without warrants. And he was fired. He was threatened with criminal prosecution. And he ended up, for a while at least, working in an Apple store in Bethesda, Maryland.
He helped me, and I thought, wow, this is like the smartest person they've ever had at this Apple store.
Well, he's really a brilliant guy, and
I didn't realize who he was.
No, I mean, I spoke to him at length for my book on civil liberties, and he was extremely helpful, knowledgeable, and highly ethical. And this really characterizes so many of the whistleblowers. They are highly ethical people.
Yes.
I think Thomas Drake pleaded guilty to the misuse of a government computer, something minor that ended up with no jail time or anything. But, it ruined his career. I mean, that was the problem. And he also lost his pension, I believe, because he got fired just before his retirement age.
So, Dana, the Government Accountability Project and you have been guiding other whistleblowers for years and years. Have you and your colleagues been able to protect your clients from this kind of retaliation to the people you represent?
Oh, no. I mean, this completely happens. I mean, that's why I have that radical conversation with people about the real risk of retaliation. Absolutely. Death threats, harassment, being isolated, demoted. The nurse we represented who raised concerns about women in detention suffering high rates of non-consensual gynecological procedures. She had to go into hiding because of death threats with her family for 2 months. She had security, protection.
People's family lives turn upside down, right? Because the person loses work.
She was blacklisted from her work during COVID, could not find a work as a nurse. Basically she should have been able to work anywhere she wanted, right? But was known as the whistleblower. She's had a really hard time, and at the same time has made tremendous change. She saved lives. That facility was shut down until very recently when the Trump administration opened it again. And that is why I'm always like, the sooner someone can get legal advice early before they've blown the whistle in some ways, like getting that advice early can really make a difference in terms of the experience that they have.
In your own experience, do you know whether most of the people you've represented over the years, over decades now, would say, I'm glad I did stand up and blow the whistle?
Yes. Most to a person do not regret blowing the whistle. Most people would say they would have done it differently, but they don't regret it.
And I guess the big question is, these victories you've been talking about sound great. But, and I ask this echoing back to what you talked about, your hope and despair period, can they really stop Trump from gutting America's democracy, your victories?
I think they are, I don't know. I think they are a piece of right action. There are collective efforts by so many right now working to protect democracy, preserve democracy, stand up for the rule of law and the collective public interest. It's not going to be one thing that makes the difference. It's this aggregate of sane people.
Sorry to laugh at the word sane.
But it is. It's like a vote in favor of like sanity and truth and fundamental values that we used to take for granted, right? It's people coming together using the different tools in their toolboxes to contribute to a vision of society rooted in truth and the rule of law, and support for human dignity, accountability, and sane representative government. We have two very different visions right now. We are looking at autocracy and we're looking at democracy. And we know that the tools that feed autocracy are things like falsehoods and lies and abuses of power. And democracy is fueled by truth and collective action and civil society and a free press and representative government that is functional and the rule of law with courts. And I think when you inject information, like our little thing that we do, which allows us to punch way above our weight. You have an individual who has information and they're about wrongdoing that nobody else has access to, that is highly credible because they have evidence to support it, choosing to risk speaking up to say this is not okay, and us helping them leverage that information, sharing it with the press, with public interest partners, with members of Congress who are exercising their oversight authority to do investigations, with lawmakers, with the courts, right? We are seeing the power of our weird methodology of empowering the ethical action of an individual to fuel the mechanisms of democracy. And I think that I see it working. I'm not saying it is solving everything, but it is part of an ecosystem of so many different smart, dedicated, organized people, from individual citizens within institutions that they care about to activists who are working on the ground, organizing people to protest. So I don't know if it's going to work, but I know it's a piece of the solution. And I think if nothing else, it sends a beacon of inspiration, which is maybe what we all need. Like when one person stands up and does the right thing, I think it's inspiring. And I think that is a piece of the fuel to keep going and trying and doing the right thing, as opposed to checking out. And if there's a chance, I want to go down fighting this way. I'm not saying it's going to work, but I know I'm going to be on the right side of history, and I'm standing with people who make my courage contagious, I guess. And I am totally inspired that I get to support individual employees of conscience who are willing to stand up and do the right thing. And I see them making a difference over time, over history, and we'll see if it continues to work. It has for years.
Dana Gold is one of the directors of the Government Accountability Project. Dana, you're going to help me sleep a teeny bit better, I think.
Well, I think the more people see this, the less helpless they have to feel. In every authoritarian system, including the one that's being developed in the United States, there is a kind of learned helplessness. And it's important for people like you to be in the spotlight. And our good wishes and praise and thanks for your good work.
Thank you both so much. I'm just thrilled to be in conversation with you both.
And that's it for this episode of Two Reporters.
You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or pretty much any leading podcast site. And we hope you'll check out more of our work at tworeporters.org. I'm David Tripler.
And I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Please join us again soon for another episode of Two Reporters. Bye-bye.